Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, I'm Sam James. I'm president of the parish board. And the parish board has called a special meeting for us to start to consider whether we wish to add ventilation and filtration to the sanctuary, as well as continuous ventilation and filtration to the parish hall, the gathering halls, and the classrooms. This meeting is also being sponsored by the Finance Committee, the COVID Task Force, and the Property Care Committee. Now, before we get too deeply into this, there's a couple of things I need to say. When we vote at the end of the meeting, the technology will only allow 2 people to vote per device. So if more than 2 of you are participating by one computer, a tablet or whatever, you'll need to fire up a second device in order to be able to vote. The second is our youth members can vote on anything except for calling a minister and a contract. Since this is a contractual meeting, our youth members will have to take a break. I'm sorry for that. I want to give you some background as to how we got here. Last March, we became aware of a serious crisis at the Mount Vernon, Washington Presbyterian Church when their choir of 121 gathered for 2 hours for choir practice. And 3 weeks later, 45 members were sick and 2 had died. In July, the New York Times did an article that stated that 40 congregations were responsible for 650 cases of COVID. Closer to home, you may remember that in Maine, a wedding reception of 55 people resulted in 177 cases and 7 deaths. And the Fitchburg, Mass. Department of Health said that the Crossroads Community Church was responsible for 150 cases. These are devastating numbers. We would be no different if we were meeting as well. Now, we know that when this crisis is over, people have been vaccinated, we will return. But from all that I read, coronaviruses have been here since the beginning of time. They're going to be around, rhinoviruses and all other viruses. And right now, I can't say, and I don't think any of the partners in the church can say, that we do have a healthy environment. And from what we understand, ventilation and HEPA level filtration will greatly improve our chances of not infecting each other going forward. This is especially true for those of us who are older members of the church. The acts of worship, singing, holding hands, talking, sitting close together for more than 15 minutes, all contribute to the transmission of this virus. So this is the urgency that brings us to this meeting. We have been addressing this for 8 months, and in different groups have been able to finally come to a point to bring this to you, because only the church community can make a decision like this, whether to move forward or not. The board cannot. We have 3 panelists who I believe will give you all of the information that you need to be able to make a decision up or down. The first is Jody Renoff. Jody is not only our clerk, but by day he's a civil engineer. He's a certified energy auditor, as well as a senior project manager for large and small projects in universities, as well as in industry. Jody has worked tirelessly with our consultant with Cambridge Energy Services to come up with a plan which will meet our immediate needs for both the sanctuary as well as the rest of our church buildings. He will be making the presentation of the plan that is being proposed. Now, if you have questions, you don't look on your screen and you'll see a little button that says ask a question. If you'd like more information from Jody about a particular topic he has addressed, just write it in. Please don't debate Jody now on this particular piece. There'll be a discussion time and we can get into that later. After Jody finishes, Stefan Frank will present the Finance Committee's proposal to the parish board. The Finance Committee has been an invaluable partner to us, and they're the ones who made a proposal, and we in turn adopted it and are now passing it on to you for consideration. Jody will be followed by Martha Reed, our treasurer, and Martha will talk about how we intend to pay for this particular project. And once again, if you have a question for Martha, feel free to type it in just as I described for Jody. So let's get going. Jody, if you'll put up your slides, we will get started. And thank you very much all for joining us.
Thank you. I hope that you can all see my screen. My name is Jody Renoff. I am the clerk here at First Church, and I am also the member of the Property Care Committee, as Sam described. And I've been working with our consultant, Rob Dawson, on a look at the ventilation at First Church and the needs that are present in the building. So I'd like to present to you now our findings so far and a proposal. Of course. There we go. So Rob Dawson has provided us with an engineering study in the form of 2 memos, as well as some budgetary cost estimates to go with them. And from those, the parish board and the finance committee have met separately and together to look over the options, to look at the needs and the costs, and come up with what we think is a reasonable path for the future. The options considered were reusing all of the equipment as possible. That was considered option A. It was something that when we first met a few months, I don't know, it feels like about a year ago, we had the last town hall, but I think it was fairly recently. We presented an option that had ductwork going kind of all over the upper gathering hall and through the reuse of some existing equipment, bringing air into the sanctuary. So that's kind of considered like the option A, as well as reusing as much equipment as we could throughout the building. Option B was to replace all of the equipment. And so that would be a matter of significant investment, some of which we're going to be talking about today. And then option C was an option to add cooling to areas that don't currently have air conditioning. So that was also looked at from a budgetary standpoint. From all of this, everyone deliberated and came up with a package to support, which is letter D, that has new ventilation for the sanctuary, replacement of the rooftop units that serve the kitchen and parish hall, and then reuse of the classroom air handler. So that's package D, and I'd like to talk about that now. To provide kind of a visual on what's currently at the church, you may recognize this from the last town hall meeting. This is the air handling equipment we currently have. Serving the parish hall, there is a rooftop unit, and serving the kitchen and upper gathering hall is a rooftop unit. Not shown here is another unit inside the building that provides fresh air to the classrooms. And there is no fresh air ventilation to the sanctuary or parlor. And that's kind of the area which Sam was describing earlier of the lack of ventilation. So the other areas here that have ventilation have limited ventilation that's only on when the temperature requires heating or cooling. So they are not continuously on when the spaces are occupied. And I can move on to what our current option is going forward. So the proposed option is to keep the ductwork the same for the parish hall, for the upper gathering hall, kitchen. That's all adequate for fresh air. And to change these units, to replace these rooftop units so that they run continuously and so that they are a more modern, energy efficient design. And so there's a lot to that. I can get into some of the details on the next page. But basically it's equipment that is, despite this being considered the new addition, it is at a point in its 16 year lifespan that it's at the end of its useful life. The engineering consortiums give typical lifespans of this type of equipment, like a 15 to 20 year lifespan, and that's where we are with it. So this is an opportunity to upgrade as well as replace these 2 units, and that's where a lot of the cost for package D comes in. Sanctuary and parlor that currently have no ventilation. here, the proposal is to add some energy recovery ventilation units. And what these are air handlers that bring in fresh air, provide an amount of filtration, and bring that up to a temperature that's considered tempered air. So it's not actively heated air, but it is fresh air that is heated from the air temperature of the sanctuary and parlor itself. So what does this mean? This means it's not additional heating, it's not additional cooling, it's fresh air to provide the ventilation needed per the code requirements. And that's roughly diagrammatically how things look. Now, talking about the costs and what has been turned into an eye chart here, but you all from meetings will recognize this, that we have package D is to replace the parish hall and upper gathering hall rooftop units, add new ventilation in the sanctuary, and then recommission the classroom air handler. So there's a little bit of a change that needs to happen to the heating on that unit. We also don't know whether the unit is functioning as well as it could. It has not been running. So I'm going to walk down these units in these areas line by line. First of all, rooftop units 1 and 2 are the ones that I spoke about that serve the parish hall, upper gathering hall, and kitchen. These units are 16 plus years old. They appear to be in fair condition, but the life expectancy is near the end. And any kind of major repairs require a crane. So it's not a small, when something goes wrong with these units, be it a fan motor, be it a heat exchanger, cooling system, or whatnot, we have to hire a crane to come out and take care of it. The ventilation only runs when there's a need for heating or cooling. So the space is either too hot in the summer, too cold in the winter. Of course, one workaround that was not considered or was, talked about was, well, right now we could run these units with the windows open. Like we could run full heat on and open the windows, but that's kind of the enemy of energy efficiency. So looking ahead to energy efficiency, as well as a bunch of other improvements, replacing these units is a great option where we will get improved ventilation that we want when people are in the space. We get the filtration that's talked about that's needed for the current MERV. It's a filter rating. We would go to the highest possible filter rating within occupied spaces. Reliability of having new units, energy efficiency, and also we'll be getting rid of Freon. So these units operate with Freon evaporator and condenser units. This would be a modernization to not have that Freon in the system anymore. That would be recycled. The other things we looked at were keeping the existing units, but we would have to put almost $40,000 into them to get them anywhere near functional enough to achieve what we want to achieve. And so in weighing the costs, that's how we came up to the idea of replacing these units. Moving on to the next area is the sanctuary and parlor. And we originally looked at running ductwork above the upper gathering hall. It's quite invasive to cut into that ceiling and make it look decent and still be able to use the space. Of course, the building's closed, so that's not as much of a consideration, but there's a lot more that was involved with that. It ended up costing more to reuse the existing ductwork than just simply adding new units to serve just the sanctuary and parlor. These are smaller air handlers. They are basically fresh air units, as I had described. They're going to be in the parlor attic, and they'll make use of the louvers that are in the clock tower that you see from the street to bring fresh air into the sanctuary. And then there'll be registers in the sloped ceiling of the sanctuary to bring that air in. And we kind of talked about that from a aesthetic approach back at the previous town hall. So bringing these new units in, making sure that they are the units that fit in the space, and providing that is $82,000 worth of the cost. We also looked at cooling for the sanctuary. That adds in another $121,000 to the cost. So that's not something that was considered as part of this package that we're proposing to go forward with. Next area is the classroom wing. As I had described, there is an air handler for fresh air that serves the classroom wing. It is currently controlled by 2 wall timers. No one really that uses these classrooms or uses the spaces really knows where those are. So there's some usability kind of concerns and opportunities with having a system that's automated, that's scheduled in the same way that these other units will be, onto a control system that'll run when those classrooms are occupied. The existing unit has not had much runtime because it was originally filled with, the heating system on this unit was filled with water, and it is exposed directly to outdoor air. So on a very cold day, water and cold air don't mix. And so the unit has been largely off for much of the time of its life. So we are under the hope and expectation that the unit will be serviceable and we'll be able to get it running, recommission it, convert the heating part of it to glycol so that it won't freeze, and add controls. So that's where these costs are here. We also considered replacing it. It would be a $72,000 option. So the difference there being a $40,000 add, if you will, to do this work. So this was deemed reuse being a better option in this case. And we also looked at adding cooling to that area. That adds roughly $80,000 worth of cost to the classroom wing area. So I think it kind of falls, this was, with the sanctuary, quite costly for not what really is a real additional rental draw to potentially offset it. And then the final piece of option D is to add air conditioning, add some conditioning to the spaces that are facing the street on the first floor, so that being the parlor and the minister's office. These currently have no cooling, and the church is being used throughout the year going forward. So while this other work is taking place, it is a good opportunity to make this smaller, incremental investment in providing more use to that side of the building during the summer months. So in the end, we total all of these figures and have $308,000 as the total cost that we are talking about as option package D. To not neglect the other areas in the building, the staff offices are already equipped with ventilation, and filtration can easily be upgraded to the MERV 13 filters. And the controls have already been upgraded as part of the boiler project. So we can actually program occupancy schedules already. There may be some minor maintenance that's needed for that unit, but for the most part, the basement offices are good to go. Bathrooms, the only small thing that we would need to do for providing adequate ventilation for those spaces is confirm that the exhaust fans are always on when the lights are on. So that covers the building in terms of improvements. And then looking ahead to next steps as far as the ventilation project, today, the vote. And then we move on to engineering drawings to talk about what is physically going where in much more of a better diagram than I could possibly draw. And then equipment selection. So that's the place where we can work with the engineer to make sure that the priorities of ventilation, filtration, and energy efficiency are at the top of the list. And then we go out to contractors to bid the work. We've been talking to bidders, and so we know that there is a pool out there of contractors who can do the work for us. The equipment itself takes 4+ months to get. It's not on the shelf. And so that puts installation into spring and summer of 2021. And that's assuming that we get everything spec'd and drawn and together basically in the next month. So if we end up looking ahead to how that time will fly, that's what we're looking at. And then important steps as we think ahead to the future of us getting back in the building, training users and training occupants on what's been installed and being proud of what's been installed, and making sure that it's not just a switch or a timer somewhere that no one knows, people don't know exists. So, and then arranging ongoing maintenance, because any new equipment that we install needs to be properly maintained. And that goes with anything that's new, and anything higher tech than what we have. So I want to thank everyone. I sped right through that so that then I could take questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but I can bring it back if someone has a visual question. So go back to this and look at the
Jody, we have 2 questions so far. Can you see them?
Hang on. Yeah, so question 1 is rooftop units 1 and 2 sound like they're in good shape. Can you speak to the medical necessity of replacing them? I understand it would be nice to ventilate better. So the necessity for replacing those units is not medical, it's mechanical. So I come from the HVAC background, and so really it is a question that I'd rather answer as the units are at the end of their useful life, and maintaining them is a concern going forward. The ventilation levels and amount of air and performance of those units and performance of the new units will all be vetted through current code. And so anything that is relating to fresh air exchanges at this time will be sized into selecting those new units. And the library, okay, one question again, let's see, this is asking about the library. Is the library included with the classroom space? Yes, it is. That's all part of the same air handler. Bathrooms. Will there be lids on the toilets? I will put that on a list of things to look at as a question. Okay.
We can provide that. We can make that happen.
Yeah. Quietest possible units. Great question. So in the equipment selection phase, we will ask for sound data, and that is a point where we can talk about either sound deadening, which would be something that would be installed in the ductwork to the sanctuary and to the spaces, or vibration isolation or vibration isolation springs on the units or rubber mats. There are all kinds of things that we'll be able to vet at the time of selecting the equipment. Right now, the parish hall unit does have sound deadening and sound attenuation. So our intent is to match or better that performance. And now I don't see any open questions, but I'll be back. Let me pass the baton to Stefan.
Before you go, Chris, did you want to comment?
No, I think, did Gladys have a question? I saw that, but I didn't see it in the Q&A, but we have plenty of time to get back to it. So anybody just use the Q&A if you have a question.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jody. So, can you see my presentation? Good. So I want to just speak, to, oops, why doesn't it work? Same problem than Jody. So basically, Sam came to us and the parish board came to us and said, if the congregation and the parish board decides to equip the church building with a circulation system, how would we as the finance committee propose to go about it from a financial perspective and a scope perspective? So I want to reiterate 2 key findings that Jody already told you, right? That initially, we found out that we need significant additions to the existing system, for having fresh air everywhere. But we also found out that our equipment on the roof is nearing coded end of life and is expensive and tricky to repair. So that was an unexpected finding, but a finding that we should take into consideration. So the scope proposal, Jody already talked about it, is, we replaced the rooftop mounted, the roof mounted equipment because of the trickiness of repairing it in the end of life. But the classroom system below, we do not replace it, not only because it might still have a lot of life left, also because if something happens, that is very easily accessible without a crane and can be repaired in a much easier way. So if we think now about where to take money from, so we have this ongoing FCB Forward capital campaign, and part of the capital campaign is to improve our building. And I think, you know, making this building much more virus or micro, you know, preventing is definitely a building improvement. So we felt that it's that our proposal should be founded to see what we can do with the money that we have from the campaign without betraying the original goals that we had for the campaign. So the campaign had 3 goals. One goal was pay down our building loans so that we free up annual budget for programming. Before the campaign started, we had about a $72,000 annual finance fee for our loans. And so that was the first goal, to get that to 0. The second one was that we invest in urgent repairs and impactful enhancement to the building. So there's a long list of things that we can do to the building, also to make it more attractive to renters, but also to make it more attractive to us, using it more safely and things. And the third one was, we know that the organ has a problem, you know, that it's a beautiful, unique instrument that is at the heart of our sanctuary. So we wanted to kickstart an organ fund so we can really think about getting the organ in a top shape. So if we look now where we are in these goals, so far the money that we collected from the FCB Forward campaign all went into paying down loans, and we have already freed up more than $50,000 annual budget. This year we only have $16,000 for financing, whereas the 72 hours just 2 years ago, right? So we already have this reduced quite a bit. So we have still 160K in loans outstanding, and the plan was to pay them down. The plan was also that we spent $270,000 in various maintenance, repairs, and improvements projects that the Property Care Committee put together, and that we kickstart the organ fund with $100,000. And one word to the organ fund: this is a number we don't know yet what it takes to repair the organ. We didn't even have the money to have a proper assessment done. So this number, 100K, was basically a number to say that's a solid start, and we can get an engineer to see what it takes. So our proposal is now that in all 3 of these goals, we take something. So in terms of maintenance, the Property Care Committee, and Bob is here Bob Corning, to answer questions later, they put together a list of $149,000 of the most urgent repairs and some small but very impactful improvement. Right. So for example, the roof of the Johnson House is at the end, right? This is really getting to the point where we have to do something. And a few others where with very little money, we can make the building significantly better and more inviting also for renters. So we proposed that we spend this $149,000, but then spend the rest of the $270 on the HVAC system instead of other repairs and maintenance. For the organ fund, you know, we talked to Ian, and Ian thinks that for $50K, we can both get an assessment done and still have a solid foundation for later fundraising for the organ, right? Since we don't know yet where it is, all we wanted to make is put a significant start aside and have this assessment done, right? So we would save $50K there. That would leave us with a remainder of $130,000. And we would propose that we keep that $130,000 as a loan and don't pay the loan to 0. Now here I marked this or less. And I do that because we already have specific donations from very generous congregation members towards the HVAC system. And depending on how the numbers play out, this number could still go down, right? I also want to mention at this point, I think Jody said this already, what we see is an engineering assessment. It's not a bidding answer, right? So once we put this out to bid, we have to see where we exactly land with a number. So there might be error in both being cheaper or more expensive. Jody assured us that that Rob is very good at this assessment and leaves. So I think we trust him quite a bit. But I'm just saying that this is the variable here. And I also mentioned that on the slide. 130K in a loan means that for the next 20 years, we have an additional load of $9,000 on the operational budget per year that we cannot use for programming. So that's the effect on that. One word on timing and cash flow. So if we do this HVAC system, it makes sense to do that as quickly as we can. Some of the property care units like painting on new floors and stuff like that, they benefit a lot from an empty church. So the idea is that we do the majority of the, or not the majority, but a big chunk of this maintenance work and the HVAC system in Q1, Q2 latest. However, on the other hand, not all of the money of the FCB Forward money is collected and in hand. So there might be a cash shortfall, there might be a cash flow problem. We don't expect a shortfall, and the reason is that A, we still have a building fund for emergencies of $50,000, and currently, if all plays out as planned, we have about a 40K shortfall. So that alone might be enough for us to cover this. We have the additional donations that help us greatly, on this. We're also going to have, we're going to ask you that if you can to fulfill the FCB Forward pledge as early as you can. I know right now it's not easy, but if you can, that would help a lot with this cash flow issue. And also some of the maintenance work can be pushed if we run into a cash flow situation. So we strongly expect by all numbers that we do not need additional money to cover the cash flow. However, if we do need additional cash flow, we were prepared to say that up to $250,000, raising the $160,000 loan from the endowment to $250,000 for a maximum of 2 years is something that the finance committee would say is acceptable. Right? Again, I feel strongly we might not have to use it, but I wanted to put it out there in case we run into something that forces us to have more cash on hand. And so what is the result of this? The result is that once we return to the building, our building will have minimized the risk of transmission of airborne diseases. So it will, both for congregants and renters, it will be a space where we feel as safe as possible in a group setting. And we also can assume that we won't have to deal with HVAC for many years because, the end-of-life rooftop systems are going to be replaced. So that means that we have the I think it's fair to say that we expect not to have to deal with it. Again, the downsides is we have about 9K additional load for another 20 years that we cannot spend on programming, cannot spend on salaries or something like that. There are some major building projects and improvements that we were hoping for that we cannot do because of this. And the organ fund, will be at a lower level and has a higher fundraising goal once we know where we have to be with this money. So with this, I'm happy to answer questions, but I think Martha will just show what I showed in really big numbers in more detailed numbers. So I think I'm going to hand it over to her directly, and then afterwards we're going to take questions together with Martha and I.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to show you in numbers what Stefan showed us in words. So the existing, this picture here is just the big overall picture of what the whole project looks like. We currently have on hand $371,000 of cash from the capital campaign, FCB Forward. As Stefan mentioned, we've received $15,000 in new pledges, which are specific for this project. And then we also have campaign receipts, payments on pledges that we expect to receive by the end of 2021, which would amount to $180,000. So in total, this leaves us about $566,000 of available money to spend. Against that, we had determined that we're going to spend $149,000 on the property care repairs, $50,000 for the organ repair, and then another $10,000 for general campaign administrative expenses, and these would end at the end of 2021. So the difference between the available funds and the uses is $357,000. If we look at the $308,000 of potential cost for the ventilation system, the bottom line is, yes, we can pay for this. And moving to the other point, which is the very immediate cash flow. How much cash do we have on hand to be able to pay for this? We anticipate that in 2021, this will be this fiscal year 2021 that ends on June 30th, 21. We have on hand the $371,000. Property care will spend $85,000 of their total $149,000. We'll have $5,000 of the administrative expenses, but we'll add in the $15,000 of new campaign gifts. So in this current fiscal year, we would have available $296,000 for the project. Again, take away compared to the $308,000 of the actual cost of the ventilation would leave us another $12,000 that we would have to borrow. Again, is this temporary short-term borrowing from the endowment. Looking forward to 2022, we would hope to collect the balance of the pledges. We take out the $50,000 for the organ study. We allotted additional $64,000 to the property care committee. And we have an additional, the remaining $5,000 of administrative campaign expense, which leaves us with a balance of $61,000, which we could use to pay down the balance of the loan in the endowment. This last box is just a snapshot of where the endowment itself is. We currently have the $160,000 loan that's on the books. If we add the $12,000 from up above that we might need, will give us $172,000 of potential loan from the endowment. If we use the entire $61,000 of cash to pay it down, we could get down as low as $111,000. And these are all theoretical numbers. They're all big picture numbers, and nothing that we have so far can be set in stone, but we did want to give you an overall picture of where the dollars stood. I will turn it back to Sam, I guess, or whoever's.
Are there any questions for Martha? I see that there are a couple of questions in the Q&A. I think both of those are more to Jody than they are to Martha. Are there any questions about financing?
I think the questions are basically about, are more for Bob or for Mike, because it's more about what are the projects that we cannot do because we take only 149,000 instead of the 250,000. Mike or Bob, do you have an answer to that?
I can take a pass at it. Good afternoon, everybody. So when we were, we have the Property Care Committee has a pretty exhaustive list of projects for the church, both for asset preservation as well as cosmetics, as well as nice to have in terms of programming and those kind of things. We worked hard with the capital campaign to come up with a list of proposed projects that would fill that original budget of like 250 or 270, whatever it was. And some of the more prioritized items from that are in the current proposal, the 150, and that's the Johnson House, roof repair and trim replacement, some of the floor work that's being done in the parlor, in the front foyer, in the annex, as well as some interior painting projects that, as Stefan mentioned, is nice to get done while there's nobody using the church. But the things that aren't currently prioritized are, we had a pretty robust plan to do some pretty significant improvements in the parish hall in terms of lighting, AV, curtains, stage improvements. Those are being put aside. First Church Green came up with a whole number of potential energy saving initiatives, mostly related to lighting and controls. That's all being put on the back burner. We were looking at doing some significant wiring upgrades in the area above the sanctuary and the parlor. That's going to be put on hold temporarily. And then there's a whole list of smaller items that we're just not going to get to at this point in time. So I don't know if that helps.
We have a second question. That's what's the current state of our fiscal year 21 projections? I guess that's to you, Martha.
Currently, things look good. People have been responding to the need for pledge payments. And as far as we could tell at this point in the year, and that's a very cautionary statement, but we seem to be running basically according to plan. We're also starting to identify certain line items that we have put in the budget to spend that we know, unfortunately, we won't be able to spend, such as coffee hour snacks. And we'll be making trade-offs of those potential savings and other required expenses.
Let me also say something, because we spent the last finance committee going through the budget line by line. And really, because, in these times, it's so difficult to foretell, the assumptions that we made in June, some of them sound like they were done, 20 years ago. So some of we have some shortfalls in income. The two big shortfalls that we have is the plate income. The plate is running super low, and even our low assumptions are most likely undercut. And the other one is that we were still planning to have some form of musical in the spring, some form of, let's say, revenue generating musical. I know we still have a musical, but it's of course a different story in terms of revenue. So we do have shortfalls there. However, on the cost side, we have roughly similar cost savings. A lot of it comes from the committee budgets. The committee budgets are just running lower. Music budgets run lower, and also the utilities run significantly lower. So I think we came up about a $1,000 or $2,000 difference, in making up for this lost income with the cost savings that we have. I just wanted to make sure that we do know that our planning was flawed. It just seems to work out from what we can say today. Of course, a super important one is, and let me allow to make this point here, is that the next campaign, the next pledge, and the pledge for the next year is coming in well and good, so that we can go forward accordingly. I think that's what we have to watch closely. I hope that a lot of us can still give in a good way. But from where we sit right now, the budget actually looks good for the year.
The next question, I think, Jody, is for you. Please give what specifics you can about how this ventilation project will improve indoor air quality and any positive impact on avoiding airborne disease transmission.
Okay, I'd like to address that by answering that right now there is no air change or air exchange in the sanctuary or parlor, except by completely passive means. The building breathes. So this particular project in that area will add fresh air ventilation that will provide the code requirement for that amount of outdoor air for the space and for the number of occupants. And then going to the parish hall and to the newer side of the building, where the air is it is a return air unit for the parish hall, we would be able to improve the filtering of that unit, as well as have those units run during the times when and provide those air exchanges while people are in the space. And again, that's all per code, per ASHRAE 62.1 is the code that people follow for outdoor air ventilation. And we would be basically coming up to that code. I don't know if that makes that answers the question.
The next question is, I'm wondering about putting the wiring upgrades in the parlor on hold. I know that there was concern about the potential hazards and that this may pose. What happened to the question?
Sorry, I just moved it, but it's basically whether whether we feel differently about the wiring or we're just sort of putting it on hold.
Bob or Mike, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, Bob, can I interject? There are no hazards. The reality is we've had electricians look over those systems. There are no existing hazards in the wiring. It's old, but as long as it's not tampered with, it's totally safe and per code. So there is a chance that we'll be able to do some upgrades when we are doing the mechanical improvements for the ventilation, but we don't really need to feel pressured. We need to find out what the demands will be, what the requirements are of the programs in the sanctuary. And we want to support those, but we really don't have to feel pressured by any incipient risks. Okay.
The next question, assume we can revisit the question at the end of 2021 of how to use the extra $60,000 from the campaign, perhaps for property care as opposed to paying down the endowment loan. Martha, do you have a thought about that? It seems to me we're open to all options.
Yes, and I think as I was going through my numbers, it says it could be available to pay down the loan, but we haven't made any absolute commitments. So yes, I think it's all to be considered as we move forward and see how the specific numbers play out.
I think since we're in a pandemic around this, we're trying to be more conservative than not, just because we don't know how all of this is going to play out, but we are open to all possibilities and doing in what's the church's best interest. The next question, how much is solar array helping in utility savings? Have you considered a commercial grade air source heat pump? Martha, do you want to speak to that in terms of how much solar is helping with?
I don't have exact numbers. We did an exhaustive analysis of it last year and determined that it was having an impact. I don't know, Jody, do you have anything more exact?
I'm not in really the solar numbers. I'm not up to speed on that. I can answer the second part of the question though, if someone else wants to noodle on the solar question. So commercial grade air source heat pump. When it comes time to equipment selection, that's what I was sort of alluding to. We'll look at what the most energy efficient option is for the spaces. And that's part of, once we get kind of the funding and are able to get the engineer more involved to answer and look into those questions in more detail, then we'll ask the question, does an air source heat pump for certain areas make sense? So that's an open question. We're not ruling anything out.
Jody, there's another question here about what other solutions did we consider besides ventilation adjustments to improve air quality? There's a new air sanitizer in my gym, for example. Would you speak?
So ASHRAE, who's the engineering body that provides the code that is followed in the HVAC industry, presented a paper on filtration and is due to revise it in the coming months, like in February, I think. They did not come to any conclusion that such filtration devices, standalone filtration devices, were like there was no gold standard or really standard, so to speak, in implementation or selection of those. So we're going with the engineering code on this, and that is to bring in outdoor air. What time and time again, as I read these documents that are put out by the engineers, outdoor air and air change is the key to maintaining the health of the spaces in the building.
The next question, how will the system be effective if the filter standards are increased? For example, the airflow is further retarded by denser filters?
So in selecting a unit, we can provide a little bit. In fact, there is in the classroom unit already one of the considerations going into keeping that particular air handler is that it is oversized. So it already has about 15% more capacity, 15 to 20% more capacity to push more air, to have more fan power. So that's another thing that we will be thinking about when we get to the equipment selection phase with the engineer. Same thing with the sanctuary. We'll be looking at giving a little more headroom for something that may become a requirement down the road. Of course, we can't plan for something that could be double or triple what is needed, but we can do a certain amount of, and provide ourselves a little bit of room.
Are there any more questions that people have? Why are we not reserving from the building fund and then using saved money to pay for predictable end of life of equipment? Borrowing from the endowment to pay for anything when we just had a capital campaign to pay it off feels like it should be done only in an emergency. Who would like to speak to that?
I do think that's a fair point, Scott. I do, the reason why we consider this right now is, that the end of life was not considered, right? We do not have enough in the building fund to have enough to replace these rooftop units by the end of the life, right? I don't want to blame anybody for it. It came out in this engineering as a bit of a surprise. And we have to make sure that we do not make the same mistake again and that we in the future plan for that better. Right? The reason why I would still, or why the finance committee has still proposed to do it now is because of the, because of this work going on up there anyway, right? And also because it then has, it's a better system, yeah. But I think it is a fair question.
A response is that isn't a pandemic that leads us not being able to use our church in emergency. And clearly there are lots of opinions on this, and we have tried to consider them all and bring them into some sort of thoughtful way of addressing this. But I think Stefan is absolutely right. No consideration was made that this is very expensive equipment and that it was going to at one point fail. And when it fails, it just fails. There's no warning. And if we're sitting on having to wait 4 months to get equipment, and it fails in the wintertime, we're in an awful lot of trouble. So we're trying to just head that off. And then one of the things we are going to have to tackle is in 15 to 20 years, how do we have enough money set aside that we can address this from monies that are escrowed? The next question, have you considered also purchasing a UV sanitizer machine like an airplane? I don't think so. Jody, would you speak to the need for that, juxtaposed with what we're talking about?
That's something that I will ask our engineer about, the possibility of UV on the scale of the large spaces that we're talking about. The geometry of the spaces probably doesn't lend itself to UV cleaning of the air. But that being said, that's a question we can ask. And then I'll go back to my original answer on the other question, which was around other forms of like spot filtration. And the best standard that's out there right now is bringing outdoor air into the space and circulating, having the air changes per code. So I'll just go back to that as being the standard that engineers look for.
Any other questions? A follow-up to that, I'm assuming it's about the UV filters. It's for items, not air. I'm not real sure what that means. Do you, Jody? Another question? I guess for UV for pews and the like. We haven't considered that, no. We've been staying more focused on just the air quality and of the buildings and how to keep that safe. And in terms of any type of sanitization of the pews and the like, I guess that's the next order of business. Can you share the team's thoughts on whether this will really get us back into the sanctuary significantly earlier? No. This will, as I said earlier, this is really for the future. We will not be back in the sanctuary until we have a vaccine for COVID-19. But after we do have a vaccine, coronaviruses, rhinoviruses, all viruses are here to stay. And it's just a way of making our sanctuary, our building safer. Some of the people, and I don't know if they're pessimists or not, tend to think that our lifestyles are lending themselves to more coronaviruses and that this is not a standalone. So that there is a likely possibility we would have to face this again. I sure hope not. But if it does occur, then I think we're a little better positioned.
I would only add to that, Sam. I do think that a number of people, whenever we do have a vaccine, still a number of our congregants will be reticent to come back, but knowing that we've done our due diligence and knowing that we've treated the space to make it as healthy as possible, I think will go a long way for people feeling comfortable to come back.
I would also like to remind some of you who you have to leave sooner, you can't vote unless you're present at the time of the vote. The bylaws won't allow people to vote unless you're here when we actually call for the vote. Any other questions? Given that the solution won't impact us in a positive way until after a vaccine anyway, have you considered waiting until after the coming pledge drive to make the decision? We have, and we have decided that there is a long delay. If you look that we're talking in November, and we're going to be lucky if construction starts in June. So to be able to put it off is a concern. Another concern I have is, and I only heard this on NPR, is the number of places that are looking to HVAC companies to retrofit their buildings. And I am concerned that the longer we wait to get into the queue, it'll be harder to get into the queue. A second quote, is there a quorum? Yes, we need 61, and according, we have 82 attendees. That means 82 units. I don't know how many people, we'll only know when there's a vote, but we definitely have enough for a quorum. There's a call for a vote. Is there a second? We need somebody to second.
Second.
If you remember from the annual meeting, that Janice Zazinski will put on the screen the question as well as vote yay or vote nay. And it'll come up twice. For the first person, go ahead and vote. And then for the second one, if there are two of you, put vote, and then that will submit. If you are looking on a device by yourself, on the second screen, it will say yay or nay, and it will also say no other member of the household. It's at that point, click that on the second page if you're at a screen by yourself. So go ahead, folks, weigh in and vote, and let's see. Janice, will we see on the screen the vote, or will you be letting one of us know?
I will share the screen with the votes when the vote is over.
Thank you.
The
Again-
second vote will come up after this one is finished.
Yeah, Janice, we need to get a second vote in this household. How do you do that?
That will be the second, you'll see in just a minute when this is done.
Thanks.
What it looks like. Some people are still voting. So we'll give it about 10 more seconds.
Is that the final vote or just from the first
No,
one?
there's one more vote for the second member of the household. I'm going to launch that in just now. Hold on.
While people are voting, the bylaws call for a simple majority to pass the recommendation.
Cora is tallying the actual numbers as opposed to the percentage. Going to give this about 10 more seconds. Ending this.
We had 97 yeses and 5 nos.
Okay, the proposal passes. In closing, I just want to say thank you for everyone taking the time today to participate in this. It is my wish of all wishes that sometime this summer we can have a gathering celebration that this is all over, and that you will have an opportunity not only for us all to see each other, but to be able to see what your commitment to this community actually means in terms of how we take care of our buildings and subsequently how we take care of ourselves. As stated, the construction won't begin until the spring or the summer. As we get closer to a commitment date, I will start keeping you updated through the Unitarian so that you have an understanding of how this is actually transgressing and carrying out. I want to say a few thank yous. We are in debt to John Howe, Anna Hammock, and Heather Quay, and the FCB Forward group, as well as everyone who contributed. If it were not for this, we wouldn't be having this meeting, and I don't know what we would be doing. But the total commitment to bringing down the debt, of looking forward into the future, helped us when a crisis landed on us that we were not anticipating. I also want to say to Jody Renoff and Martha Reed, they are incredible partners in this whole process. They have worked tirelessly and have been through one draft, one design after another for months as we have kept looking at this. And so if you know Jody and you know Martha well, give them some attaboys and attagirls and a lot of high fives because they well deserve it. We will, with the COVID task force, we agreed to get back around the first of the year, but quite honestly, I think it may be later. We want to see how the vaccines play out. If there's a lot of information, we'll schedule a town hall. If there's not a lot of information, then it's probably a series of emails to just update you will be enough. But for sure, the annual meeting in all probability will be in the same type of format as we're having here today. So I want to thank you once again for attending. Happy Thanksgiving. I think for a lot of us, it's going to be quieter and a bit sad, but it's still Thanksgiving. Stay safe and have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.